Hello, everyone. Good evening and warm greeting from beautiful England here in United Kingdom. I hope you all good, and I'm super excited to be back after the 2 weeks break when we haven't seen each other. So, welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. I am also heavily involved with the Clever Photographer. If you haven't seen us, make sure that you visit our website, cleverphotographer.com. And while you're here, might as well just say hello. Welcome to everyone who's watching us live. If you are, please make sure that you write in a comment where you're watching from and wha- uh, for those who watching in replay, just thank you very much for watching afterwards, and I hope you all going to have a fun. So anyway, 2 weeks went super fast. In the meantime, I went down south to the south of France. I spent some time in the beautiful Camargue region where I was photographing horses, bulls, and flamingos, and I will tell you more about it in a moment. And after that, I also went to Provence, where I was photographing beautiful lavender field with some models, and it was lots of fun too. However, before we move to that, let's quickly talk about the photography review show. If you've never been here before, the whole idea is to receive your images and then provide you a feedback about the pictures to make sure that you keep pushing your photography forward. Now, we always do it in a system of kind of three levels. We start by looking at the technical part of the images, where we look at the camera details, how you capture the image, what was your camera settings. And then we look at the technical part of the image, where we look at exposure, sharpness, and stuff like that. So I try to give you tips and tricks on what you could improve or what you could do a little better next time. After that, we look at the artistic part of the image. That's where we look at the things like composition, storytelling, main subject, and all of that put together to create the overall artistic feel and impact on the viewer. If we have a time and if I think it's beneficial, I also look at the third part of the image, and that's the post processing, the photo editing. So usually we take one of your images and then run it through the software to see what we could do differently and what we could improve for future. So this is what we do in this photography review show. And if you want to join us, there's nothing easier than just quickly jumping to our website, cleverphotographer.com/forward membership. There you can sign up, and then you will get access to sending images into this show. Other than that, you will also get the monthly bundles full of digital tools, including skies, presets, LUTs, textures, overlays, brushes, and everything you can imagine. So that's also another perk. And on top of it, you can also join our Clever Photographer Facebook Academy, where we talk and show our images and we talk all things photography. So that is all out of the way. We have a Tony. Tony, greetings to you. Hello also to Zdeněk. And to rest of you, if you are watching us live, make sure that you write us in the comments so we can say hello and see where you're watching from. While we're still waiting for some people to join us, let me tell you a little bit more about my trip to the south of France. So in today's episode, I want to tell you a little bit more about photographing the Camargue horses in the south of France. So let me just quickly make the screen a little bit bigger. I'm here in Lightroom and I have some of the pictures here. They are not edited. That's not the whole point. I just want to tell you about how does photo shoot like that work. Let's take 2-3 minutes and let me tell you more about it. So Camargue horses, very famous, obviously a photographic subject in the south of France. You can see them on a picture right here. Let me even zoom a little bit closer. Beautiful, beautiful subject and really incredible experience to be able to photograph them. So how does it work? Well, when you come to Camargue in the south of France, these horses actually live everywhere there. Everywhere you drive, you see the horses on marshes or in the little enclosures. You can rent them or rent a service to ride them. You can stop by and take a picture with them. However, really the highlight is to take them into the sea or into the water and being able to photograph them there. Now, to do that and really get the full experience, you will have to hire a guide. We had a guide. Her name was Cecil. She's been doing it for years. And on the top of the fact that she's a great photographer, she also has been doing the same thing for so long that she's now able to really communicate with the owners who bring the horses, navigate them around them. Because she's photographer, she's also able to really look for the right composition, and that to me is the best way to get this experience. So you basically book a guide which will tell you where you're going to meet them, and then in that spot, in this specific situation on the beach, they bring the horses there, and then they do anything pretty much you ask them for. However, if you never photographed horses before, this is where the guide come in really handy, as she really navigates them around and tell them what to do. Usually they bring maybe 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 horses plus 3 guides with horses too. So as you can see here, you can see one of the guides really guiding the horses through the water towards us. And that was really the idea of the whole photo shoot. So let me come back to some of the other pictures. So it all starts by them coming to this very shallow water where they basically just stand and you wait as long as you can for the water to get really flat, and then you photograph it with a reflection in the water. So the horses are very calm. Half of the time they actually falling asleep. So it's not really issue to keep them calm, it's issue to keep them with the open eyes. So they just stand there like this and you take a picture of them in the water. So that's the first part, and that's what you do there. After that, they start to walk with them around and give you even more opportunities for pictures. So you can get views like this. Again, you need to be a little bit patient to wait until the moment comes when you will get great reflection. So it takes a little bit of time. They work around you in 360 degrees, and you can photograph them with the sun behind, sun in front, and you can end up with great pictures there as well. So you can get something like this, or I have other pictures. Once again, these are not edited, but it gives you an idea of what they do. So first they just stand, and then they walk around you in a circle. Once they're done with that, once you get some great images, again, maybe something like, let me see, something like this, you can really get great pictures, you can get them in motion and so on. After that, they actually round them up and let them run towards you. That's also a great experience. They are still in this really shallow water, and they run towards you in a full speed. It's not as dramatic as when it's inside of the waves, but it's still great experience. Usually 1 or 2 guides running on a side of them. You can also see one behind, and they just guide them towards you. And when they get in front of you, they just basically completely avoid you and they run behind. So the only damage you can get is the water on your camera. So that's the next step. They just run back and forwards towards you. You get maybe 4 or 5 tries, and then that's that part over. And finally, when you're done with all of that, and when the light is at its best, then they take the horses into the actual sea. Now, to keep them in the sea, the guides have to run on a side of the horses. So you can see here how they kind of run on a side. And once they do it a few times, the horses understand, and then they pretty much run on their own. And you can get pictures like, if I get one cool one, maybe something like this. Let me zoom again, not edited, but it will give you an idea of what you can get when then run towards you. So that's pretty much the whole experience. After that, they kind of stand around. You try different light. The one where you get the light from behind is also super cool. If you're lucky enough, you maybe get a shot like this with lots of sun coming from a side. And if there is still a little bit of light and you have extra time, then the guides may be posing with sun, as you can see on the image here. You can also get something like this, where you get the sun behind the horses. Or we even try to position them with the sun between them, which was also lots of fun. So the whole photo shoot takes about 3 hours. And when you finish, if you like me, you end up with maybe 700, 800 pictures. I don't really know how many of them will be usable. I'm assuming maybe 10, 15, 20, depends on what I'm going to use them for. But it really is great fun. And if you ever going into that area, first, I definitely recommend you to hiring a guide, which will help you to make this all easier. And I definitely suggest you to do it because it's a lots of fun. So that is the first part of my journey and a little bit more about how to photograph Camargue horses. And now we're gonna jump to your pictures. So let me open Luminar Neo. We are all good here. Let's hope everything will come up nicely. Of course, when you need it, it doesn't work. So let me just close it and open it. Right here, perfect. And now we are good. So we have 2, 4, 6, 7 photographers, 20 images. We're not going to review all of them, but definitely look at least 2 images from each one of you. And now it's time to start. So starting from landscape photographer here, David, we have 2 images from you, and we're going to start looking at them right away. So just as I mentioned on the beginning, we're going to start with the technical part of the review, and that's where we look at the camera details and the image itself. So David, let's jump to it. Starting with this one, it looks like it's a Sony 7 Mark II with the lens 28 to 70 millimeters. And from the camera settings, ISO 100, 28 millimeters, f11, and 1/200 of a second. So as a camera settings, I think all good there. 100 on ISO to avoid any additional noise. 28 millimeters is a nice wide look. F11 is great in this case, just making sure that we have sharpness all the way. And 1/200 of a second, obviously just making sure the exposure is good and we get the right details again all the way through. So when it comes to camera settings, I don't really see anything wrong. So let's just zoom in. Obviously the image is tiny little bit smaller, but however, noise-wise, I don't really see anything too bad. Now the sharpness, because of the image, I think it's very sharp. You can see the sharpness all the way through, but you see a little bit of pixelating, but that's more the image than anything else. And I think it's quite nice. I like the sun from the front. It creates really nice look. It picks all the colors. The reflection is also very lovely, even though there are some wrinkles, but really you can see most of the boats, so that's really cool. Also a little bit of texture in the sky. I think the combination of it is really nice. Now, moving to the artistic part, I think again the reflection is really, really lovely. The panorama crop works really well here as well, so I think that's a great choice. Now, I would have maybe tried to add a little bit more of the water if it would be possible, just a little bit pushing the picture up. I think that balance of the reflection works really well when it's more closer to the center of the image. If it wasn't possible, it's not a big deal. It's just a little thing that maybe I would twist. Now, looking at the water itself, I can see a little bit of sensor dust here, is one here and one here. Something really easy to remove, especially here in Luminar Neo. However, by removing it, really, you just make sure that you're not distracting the viewer and make it look even more professional. So here in Luminar Neo, it's super simple. You just jump into Edit Module, then you go into the Erase tool, and you just click on Remove Dust Spot. What it does, it basically scans the image and remove it. And of course, with my luck, it didn't find these 2 spots. So after that, we can just basically paint over the spot and click on Erase. And similarly, with the bigger spot right here, you can just select it and click on Erase. So that's the 2 spots I have noticed gone, and and once I close it, I zoom out, and that's it. Now, in overall, since we already here in editing, I think in overall it's a little bit too saturated. I would just remove a little bit of the saturation, and a good way to do this is to use the saturation slider, and to start with, just bring the slider all the way down, so to remove the saturation, and then look at the image and start to increase the saturation on your slider. Don't look at the slider, because then your brain is already processing how much it's there. Look at the image and start to increase it. And when you're happy with the saturation, which for me is somewhere here, then just release the slider. And looking at it, I can see that the saturation now is on -25. But if I would be looking at the slider, I would think, oh, -25 is too much. It's too unsaturated, so it's not good. However, when I look at the image it looks much more natural. And the easiest way to see it now is to just go on before, where you can see how really saturated it is, and the after. Now, yes, we can push it a little bit more if we want to, maybe to somewhere minus 15. However, again, I think that that is a little bit more natural, and also it's more pleasant to look at for longer time. The first picture is great, it's really punchy and it's full of saturation. However, when you look at it for a little while, your eyes start to hurt. So to find the balance, once again, the easiest way to do this is to bring the saturation down, keep an eye on your image, and then bring the slider up without looking at it. And when you get the right point, just release it. So that would be my idea for this. After this, we're going to look at the second image, which is more of the seascape. We get some mountains, we get water with lots of texture on it, and lots of sky. So looking at it again over here, it looks like it was captured with a mobile phone, which is not a problem. It's still a picture. It says Apple iPhone 14 Pro Max. Once you use a mobile phone, the camera settings are a little bit different than when you use DSLR or mirrorless camera, so it's a bit difficult to follow it, but still ISO 125, 6.9 on the lens, minus 0.8 on the compensation, f1.8, and 1/16,000 on the shutter speed. Anyway, looking at the image, the sky is very interesting. There's lots happening there. However, you can see fair bit of noise in it. You can see how we get little pixels around. The sharpness is quite decent here. There is lot of texture mixed with, again, noise in a sea. And in overall, it's an interesting image. Technically, I think for the mobile phone, very well captured. So when we move into the composition, there are, I think, two things. For me, looking at this image, the main subject, and really when I look at it, the first thing which strikes me is the sky. So obviously, the main thing you're trying to show is the sky in this case, which is fine. However, a little bit distracting with the amount of noise. That's just the case. Now, obviously, there is this whole uh, amount of mountains and also the water. However, when you look at the image, you get maybe like 3/4 of the image being the sky, and then you have just very little of the mountains. And also because you're shooting really wide here, the mountains look really small. So if you would want more impact on the mountains itself, you would have to crop it differently or use less wider lens and then maybe stitch it together as a panorama. So that would be the way to do it. So in this way, it's perfectly fine. There is lots happening in the sky. It's interesting. However, the water and the mountains are very much as a secondary thought. If you would want to add more impact on the actual landscape, I would probably go for the 16:9 as you almost went, and just go down a little bit to bring more of the mountains into the overall composition. So more something like this. However, it's perfectly fine what you've done. It's very interesting. Lots of blue for me and lots of texture, but still well done. And thank you very much for sharing it with us. Which brings us to macro photographers of the week. We have some picture from Steven. We have 4 images, Stefan. So let's have a look at it. This one I really like. I think that works really well with the black background. Some parts are a little bit, I don't know how you probably replace the background with some kind of selection, and you can see some of the edges, which is a shame. However, the initial look, when you look at it, the yellow with the clean black, I think works really well, and I think it actually creates lovely image. So that is a lovely idea. I think it's quite clean. The light is nice from the top, creating this little shadow, and I think it works quite well. After that, we have the flowers here, which is a little bit more complex at it. Again, you can see a little bit of selection, but with the light from the bottom and with the different depth and layers, I think it can work quite well, and it's quite nice too. Now, let me just have a look. This was both with Canon 5D Mark IV. Now, I'm not crazy about this image, really. Again, similar thing. It's the cropping. I think the cropping in overall is just way too tight. Lovely idea with the water. There's a little bit of reflection, but again, you can see a similar thing. I think the cutting of the background is just with the little white glow around it. I think it's a little bit too sharp, and I'm not 100% sure about it. I think better idea is to use actual black background and work around with the light so it's more natural. Um, this one, yeah, you can see some parts really leaking through. So in overall, let's look at the two pictures here. So quickly going through the camera settings here, you have your Canon 5D Mark IV, 100 millimeters lens, and ISO 10,000, 100 millimeters, f4.5, and 1/90th of a second. Now the ISO is really high, even for macro photography. 100 millimeters, it is what it is. I'm assuming it's a prime lens, macro lens. F4.5 give you this really nice depth, 1/90th of a second. Again, it's quite slow shutter speed. So I don't know what the light condition is, but my first thing would be ISO is a little bit too high for me. And the number two, it's not really sharp. The sharp parts are, I can see sharpness in this little part here, little bit here, but the rest of it is quite soft. So I think what I would work on is first work with the light to be able to lower the ISO to get more details and texture already that way. And number two, work with the sharpness to make sure that a bigger part of the image is sharp. Now, when it comes to composition and the overall thing, I would just crop it a little bit more with focus on the flower itself. So just lightly take away from the side just to really position it in the center, and I would end up with something like this. Other than that, I think it's quite nice. It's a clean composition. Again, I quite like the black background. I think the yellow and black works nicely together. So in this image, in this case, I would focus on lowering the ISO. I would focus on finding out how I can maybe replace the dark background with natural dark background, so I wouldn't have to select and cut the flower away, and definitely focus on sharpness. After that, with this image, we are on Mark D 5D Mark IV again, 24 to 70 millimeters on the lens, and from the camera settings, ISO 400, and that's why the picture already looks much more crisp. 70 millimeters, so zoom in as much as possible on the lens. F6.7, giving us this really nice depth again, and 1/30th of a second. It's, I think, in overall the quality is a little bit better. You can see more sharpness on this part of the flower, on the stern here. The light is kind of interesting. It looks like it's coming from the bottom. You get a really heavy light from here, but in some way it looks quite artistic because it lights up the flower from under. But similar idea again. I would look at maybe trying to use natural background, dark background, so then the blending is much easier. Maybe the light here is a little bit too strong and it takes attention away from the overall image. But in overall, both of them great ideas. Don't give away the idea of the dark background. Just maybe you look for different light and try to use like a dark background, which is actually behind, and then play around with the camera settings. When it comes to light, try to use something a little bit stronger or use some kind of diffusion, which will light up the subject more evenly so you don't get heavy or strong highlights, like in this case here, taking away attention from the rest of the flower. So that was Stefan or Steven. Now moving on to next macro photographer. Tony, if I can call this one macro photography, we also have this young lady with a monkey, but I think we will focus on the captures of the flowers mostly today. So let's have a look at it. We have this dragonfly here, which is very lovely, very pretty, but the rest of it is really, really great. So for example, this one I really like. Let's look at it from the kind of first initial impression. I love the flower. The white and yellow in contrast with the green background, I think works super well. As a bonus, you get the bug climbing over, giving you idea of the scale, giving you even more depth, really kind of giving you movement and bringing the whole composition even further. So you don't have just a flower, you have a flower with a bug, and everything works really nicely together. So I really like this image. After that, we have this picture, which again I really like because it's a mixture of different things. Again, the green, in this case, more heavy, darker green, in contrast with the pink, I think works really well. And then in the middle of it is this white yellow flower, which really breaks everything uh, from the kind of boring composition. Oh, once again, you have a dark background and one color flower. Suddenly there is this white yellow flower, and I think it really works together. I think it's really lovely. It kind of stops you and make you think. Sometimes we use that when we have like if you have a really dark composition and suddenly there's something bright or something what seems like it doesn't belong there, it really stops the viewer and make him think about the view. So I think this works really well too. This is also very interesting, less saturated, with lots of white. This is a great example on how the attention works. So most of the time we say that human eyes get attracted by the brightest or whitest part of the image, which isn't always the case. In fact, human eyes get attracted by contrast. And as there is lots of white around and lots of bright parts, the actual part which get attracted is the center because it's saturated compared to the rest of the image, and it's darker, so it really stands out. Then you have the little bags, and again, with the square composition, I think that works really well. So great try here. And to finish it off, really, this is also very interesting. Almost kind of bokeh background, which also can work really well when it's nicely done, with a combination of nicely centered flower, if I can call it that way, or plant, with kind of different textures, different level of details. Some are open, some are closed. It's a mixture of nice colors together, the pink, the green. I think all of that works really nicely together. And I think altogether, it really works very well. So also great. So I just wanted to kind of run through 4 of these, talking about the different compositions and why I think they work all together. I think this is great as well. The light and highlights are maybe a little bit strong, but I completely understand why you're proud of it, because the sharpness is really nice. It's a lovely detail of the back, and it's not that easy to capture it. But really, let's just quickly jump in maybe this one and talk about it. It's a shame that it's really small resolution, because as soon as I open it, you can see how it starts to become pixelated. You can see a little bit of noise around, and it's difficult to say what is exactly sharp. However, looking at the camera settings, ISO 200 is very reasonable for this type of photography. 135 millimeters, really kind of zoom in and getting the most of the scene. F8, that's why really the flower is looking great and everything is looking kind of in scene and in depth. So I'm assuming maybe the sharpness was all over. 1/400 of a second, depending on the scene, depending on the light, probably a right decision there. I don't have a problem with it. In overall, it's a lovely, lovely scene. So really, looking at it, I think for me, one thing, I see a lots of noise, which could be maybe because it was lower light situation and you have to add some exposure, or I'm not sure. It's just there's a lot of grain around happening. The rest of it is quite nice, so I would deal with the noise. But that's about it. I think the rest is great. Maybe a little bit of more vignette to add more attention into the center of the image. That always works really well. And maybe just a little bit of local adjustments. So, maybe adding a little bit of brightness in the center and so on this one. Quickly moving to the image number 2 I wanted to talk about, which is this one. Again, great. This is much more cleaner. And even though it's also quite smaller file, maybe the transition into the JPEG was just with the higher quality here, or I don't know, but you can really see much more here. Camera settings, ISO 100, so spot on there. Always the ultimate goal on all types of photography. 135 millimeters, so really zoomed in here. F5.6 and 1/100 of a second. Everything works here. Diffused light is really nice, so there are no strong highlights or really heavy shadows. Everything is lit evenly. Even though it's 135 millimeters, maybe you use focus stacking, but there's lots of stuff in focus, and I think it works really well. You get this plant in focus, this flower mostly, also the pink in the middle, and in overall, I think it just works really, really well. So well done there. Similarly, on this one, you could play around a little bit with local adjustments. The vignette, I feel like in this photography always goes a long way. And then with the little brush, you could really start to play around with different parts, make it a little bit bigger, maybe strength around here, and then just start to really highlight different parts, something like this maybe, or even this. And then you can do the same and do a little bit of burning, so make some parts even darker. Same thing somewhere around here, and just gently darken some other parts, making the rest of it really stand out. So something like this. Let's have a look at it quickly. Before and after, and it's just a slight touch, but it can just add a little bit more interest to the human eyes. So Tony, thank you very much for sending your pictures over. I hope some of it was helpful. Well done on great captures. I'm really happy to see the compositions. You clearly have eyes for that. And also for the light, I think the diffuse light really works very well. So my only wish for next time would be for you to try to send the pictures in highest quality as possible so we can see more and I can provide even more feedback to you. Moving on. We're moving to Deepak. We have more pictures to look for. So Deepak sent us this image right here of this panorama with people, of photographers capturing this mountains. And then we have this picture right here. Now, looking at it, this goes for everybody. Guys, if you're gonna ever send pictures for photography reviews, for panel of reviewers, really always try to avoid any signature or watermarks or frames. And I tell you exactly why. As we are all artists, as soon as you send this is huge distraction for the reviewer. Immediately you look at it and you start to think about why the colors, why this type of logo, why this type of font, and you definitely don't want that. You want the review to focus only on your image and what you're trying to show them. Similarly with the frames, it takes away a little bit of the image. Now in combination with the signature, it's just really distracting from the rest of the photo. So to be honest, on this one, we're not going to look at it because I think if you have the image, just send it for the next week episode without the frame, without the logo, and I will be very happy to look at it. However, to make sure we review at least one of your pictures, let's have a look at this one. So we have this panorama right here with many photographers standing over the edge. Then we have this text sky with lots of texture in it. And then we have really nicely layered mountains with lots of depth from here. Starting by looking at the camera details, this was Canon R6 with 24 to 105 millimeters, f4. Now from the camera settings, ISO 100, 24 millimeters, f8, and 0.8 second on the shutter speed. So hence why we get some of the blur on the people, which I think actually in this case works quite well. I think it's quite lovely that they move. It adds a little bit of movement. It adds a little bit more interested, a little bit more interest in it, because I think all these people are in fact a little bit distracting. However, once you start to get this little shake effect in it, it can work quite well. And on the top of it, the people will give us again a little bit of an idea of the depth and scale. So while they're there, nice idea to work with a longer exposure. The longer exposure also give us the sky, which is kind of all streaky. So that looks quite cool too. However, after that, still staying with the technical part, I can see lots of noise in the sky, not just noise like a grain, but also color noise, which is quite interesting with the ISO 100. You can also see noise through the mountains and skies. So that kind of makes me think that maybe it was much darker, the image originally, and that you kind of push the slider. And once you do that, often we get these artifacts. You can also see on the mountains, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but if I really zoom in, you can see a really heavy glow around the mountain here. And you can't see it on the mountain at the back, which kind of make me think maybe about sky replacement. Maybe I'm wrong, but definitely on the rest of the image, you can kind of see the glow. So there's actually lots of happening on the image. And looking at the camera details, I can't really say why. So maybe it's because you push the image, you've done lots of post-processing to it. This is why you get this kind of result. So what would be beneficial to see the original file, and from that I would be maybe able to help you a little bit further. So coming from the camera, from the technical part, the noise is something I think is a little bit overwhelming. The glow, again, something that will need a little bit of fixing. However, I quite like the light. I think it looks quite even. I like the idea with the longer exposure, and I like the idea with the kind of longer clouds. Now, moving into the composition itself, if I don't focus at the technical part, the composition is quite nice. Again, the people give us a sense of depth and scale. That is, the people work as a foreground to our middle ground and background. With the one third of the sky works really well here. I think the panorama works really well here. So there is lots of good things on this image. However, I think technically you need to start first by looking at some of these things and how to fix them. So that's about it for this image. Well done. Thank you very much for sending it over. Once again, as a suggestion for the future, if you send pictures to somebody to review them, avoid the signatures and watermarks and avoid the frames. Now, moving to Donna. Donna, we have two pictures from you. So we have a portrait right here of the lady with the moving dress and fabric. And after that, we have this picture right here with the lovely bird drinking from the flower. So Donna, let's talk about it, starting with the portrait right here. Let me just have a quick drink and we can continue. Donna, this one was Nikon Z6 with 24 to 70 millimeters, ISO 500, 30 millimeters, f16, and 1/400 of a second. Now, strong light behind the subject with the ISO 500. That's quite high. I wonder what time it was captured. Now, looking at it, the sharpness and everything is quite decent. So higher ISO, no problem there. Then that's why then you're able to photograph with 1/400 of a second. The noise is quite decent. There is a little bit, but it's not overwhelming at all. So that's quite good. 30 millimeters, yeah, quite nice. I would say tight crop, but maybe just a shame that you kind of cut the legs or just a little bit of the dress here as well. Here, I think we also a little bit tight. So if you would actually want to print this image, I think, when you have to add a mount and everything, you would actually have to remove quite a bit of it. And I think that's a little bit of a shame. So always try to get a little bit extra space on the side, or if not, just crop tighter if you need, So I think just a little bit of a shoe here missing is a little bit of a shame, but that's about it on the cropping here. Now, coming back to the technical part, f16, also quite high f-stop in this case. I don't think the background really was adding anything to the overall scene, so you could have probably gone a little bit lower. So starting with the ISO, maybe just a little bit lower if possible. If not, that's fine. 30 millimeters is fine, but maybe just half a step back to get more in frame. Or if not, just go in and get even tighter crop. F16, again, a little bit too high for me. Maybe a little bit lower. F7, F4 if possible. With your lens, 2.8, maybe even lower. And then focusing more on the overall scene. Maybe you were trying to keep the whole entire dress in focus. I'm not sure. But that's what I would do. 1/400 of a second on moving fabric like this, depending what you're trying to capture, I would maybe go even a little bit faster and see if that would give you more sharpness. But that would just few things I would think that you could try differently. Now, when it comes to composition, once again, I think it brings me back to the cropping. There's nothing wrong with the image. I think the movement works really well, but I would just go tighter. So in that case, what you would do, just let's see if maybe we can do something what I think with just a simple cropping. So I think maybe just something like this. Let's have a look at it. Then yes, you're taking lots of dress away. So let me try and maybe move it around and do something like this. Yeah. And then you maybe get something a little bit more like this, still with the movement, with the sun, but a little bit tighter and with a little bit more intensity. Or again, step back and get the full thing in your picture. The sun is quite strong, but I think it works quite okay as a backlight. Um, and that's about it. Now, in overall, I think since we here talking about the image, I would maybe make it just a little bit darker, just a little bit. Maybe add a little bit more contrast. So that's how we do there. Maybe close the highlights, making them a little bit darker, and open the shadows a little bit more on that part. After that, again, little vignette, but in this case, more around the sun. So to close the image a little bit from the bottom, just something like this. Let me see, positioning it somewhere around here. Yeah, that would work really well as well. And after that, here in Luminar Neo, it's called Mystical Tool. It's basically minus clarity and a little bit of glow. I think that works really well. And top it off, just maybe a little bit of extra warmth. Now let's have a look at it before, when it's really bright and lots happening there, and after, when maybe it's just a little bit more intense with a little bit more texture, little tighter crop, and with a little bit more saturation. Now, coming back to the second image, Donna, let's talk about where is it? Here. Let's talk about the second image. Again, Nikon Z6, then with the 100 to 400 millimeters lens, and with the camera settings ISO 320, 400 millimeters, f5.6, 1/4000 of a second. Now the sharpness on the bird is spot on. I think that's all good. A little bit of the movement on the wing, but that's not a problem. Then you get the flower, you get a kind of in focus red part here, and a little bit of softness at the back. Now, in overall, I'm not sure where is the darkness at the back coming from. I think it's really, really dark. Now you can see a little bit of things leaking through it, but I just wish the background would be a little bit brighter. I understand the idea to create a separation with the background to bring more attention to the subject, but the background really seemed really, really dark for me. Now the sharpness is there. I can't really fault that. A little bit of noise from 320, but nothing crazy. But I just think that the contrast of the subject and the flower and then the background is a little bit too heavy for me. And because it's so strong, you can then see the artifacts around the wings, around the flower, and so on. So just something to keep an eye on. I'm all for darker backgrounds, but maybe this one is just a little bit too strong. In overall, the composition is interesting. Obviously, the bird is the main subject, so this is where I would maybe go for like a square crop, something like 1:1 right here, and maybe make it even a little smaller. I think it's all about the bird itself. The flower isn't that important, so I would maybe crop it to something like this. Again, the subject itself is a little bit too bright for me. So here in Luminar Neo, you can use this relight function, and you can actually make the subject a little bit darker. So somewhere around here, and the brightness of the back, maybe just a little bit up. So just a little bit down, somewhere around it. Let me show you before and after. Maybe even darker somewhere here, and get something like this. So yes, still dark background, but maybe the subject just a little bit darker to balance it itself. So that's about it on this one. The portrait was very lovely. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And the bird was very nice too. Just maybe a different cropping, brighter background for the next time. And that's about it. Donna, thank you very much for sharing the image with us. And now it's time to move to wildlife photographers, starting with Ken Camlet. Ken actually sent me these pictures last night, and he sent me a little bit of details around them. So a dragonfly right here, lovely capture with his Nikon Coolpix. This camera, if you know it, the details, camera details are not always 100%. However, still going through them, ISO 280, 126 millimeters, f5, and 1/250th of a second. Now, yes, there is a little bit of noise at the background. However, the sharpness is really nice, the light is really nice, and this is all about the subject. So obviously the dragonfly with a really nice background. I think the contrast of the brown and white with the background in this case works really well. And all I would suggest to do here is different cropping. So really you want to add as much focus on the animal as you can. So in this case, I would go for something like 16 on 9 and really add attention to the dragonfly itself. So once you're done with that, you should end up with something like this. And as always, adding more focus on the dragonfly, I would just add some gentle vignette to it. You can move it around if you want it a little bit less strong on one part. You can also add a little bit of brightness in the center of the vignette, and you could end up with something like this. So before and after. After that, also, I would make the green just a little bit less saturated because as it is kind of almost neon green, I think it's a little bit too strong. So to do this, we can adjust the whole saturation. Again, just going up and end up with something like this, which I think in overall works a little bit better. And again, it keeps the viewer looking at the picture a little bit longer as they are not distracted by the strength of the saturation. So something like this, Ken. That's what I would do with this image right here. After that, we have this bird. I don't know if he is washing himself or drinking. Anyway, Ken was mentioning that this was actually captured through 2 different glasses, which I think is quite impressive. Obviously, when you do that, you will always get this little bit of haze look. I don't know if you ever try to capture like a cityscape from the top or actually anything through glass, you will always get a little bit of like a haze effect, and the sharpness will be always a little bit off, as you can see on this image. Still great attempt to capture the bird. I think first thing I would do, I would just make sure that it's a little bit more straight. So start maybe with something like this. When we crop it around and do something like this. So then we can more focus on the subject itself. And after that, maybe again, little vignette with the direction on the bird. So something like this with a little inner light and do something like that. There is not really much we can do with the image. Again, shooting through glass has its limitation. However, at least something like this. So something like this. Ken, thank you very much for sending your pictures over. It's always a pleasure to see them. I really hope to see more in the next week's episode. And that brings us to the final photographer, Zdeněk. Zdeněk, also our winner of the June giveaway. Zdeněk, I think we already in touch. We will make sure that the book is on the way all the way to South Africa as soon as we can. And for the rest of you, if you want to join us for our next giveaway or the next competition, we have everything already planned for travel photography for August. So keep an eye on our Clever Photographer Academy group. We have some great prizes waiting for you, and it will be lots of fun. Anyway, Zdeněk has this week sent us some wildlife photos with the bird right here, with the beautiful capture, and also a crocodile hiding in a swamp right here. So starting with the bird, looking at the camera details, what does it tell us? So it doesn't tell us the camera. However, I think the lens was 55 to 250 millimeters. And looking at the camera settings, ISO 100, 250 millimeters, f7.1, and 1/400 of a second on the shutter speed. So ISO is good. Although, funny enough, the ISO is on 100, but actually I see a lot of noise on the bird itself. You can see here at the bottom and at the wings. It's kind of selective noise, which could be for different reason. Maybe it's coming from the camera itself. Either way, there is definitely noise there. The sharpness is quite good. I quite like it. There's sharpness on this part of the branch. You can also see sharpness on the head, so that's nicely done. The overall depth works very nicely. I like the soft background with still some details on it. I also like how we get some parts of the bird sharp, some little bit softer. So I think all of that works really nicely together. The light is decent. Yeah, we get the different highlights from different parts and a different direction, but nothing distracting, nothing overtaking the image. So that works quite nicely. Moving to the composition, I quite like it. I quite like how it kind of guides you through the image. You have the bird a little bit off center, with the branch working as like a leading line or like a nice element which just kind of divides the picture. The bird looking into the active empty space, that I think works really nicely too. So in overall, lovely attempt, really, really lovely. Nothing much I would add here. Obviously, working with the noise, trying to see if you could remove it with something like the denoise tool here in Luminary, or maybe the denoise with Topaz, would be my idea. But sometimes, we can't always do too much with the image. So still, lovely picture. Composition is great, but technically, I think the noise is what's the main issue on this one. Now, on this picture, we have no camera details, no lens details. Zdeněk, it's not like you at all. Now, looking at the camera details, at least the settings, this was ISO 400, 107 millimeters, f5, 1/200 of a second. ISO 400, no problem here. Actually, much less noise than on the previous image. 107 millimeters, so really zoomed in. F5, giving us really nice depth. Anyway, everything is pretty much in focus on this one. And 1/200 of a second. Again, lovely sharpness on the animal, actually. And in overall, quite nice composition. I quite like it. I quite like the panoramatic crop, which really follows the animal itself. I like how you kept a little bit of space in front of the animal. I think that also works really nicely. The texture works nicely together here. Obviously, the animal is a little bit hidden, but because of the contrast of the colors, it works nicely too. The little bit of the reflection and see-through works nicely as well. So in overall, I think this is great. It's actually a really, really lovely picture. Editing wise, maybe again, just kind of focusing, adding more local adjustments to focus more on the animal itself, maybe with a little bit of dodge and burning, more again, highlighting the actual animal. If we could adjust a little bit of brightness to the eye and maybe to nostrils and the rest of the body. Let's have a look. Something like this and like this. Let's have a look before and after. I think that helps just to add more attention and make it a little bit easier to spot the animal. Again, before and after. Also, we could really push the clarity and the details with the structure AI. That I think would also help quite nicely here. And all in all, that's about it. That's what I would do here. A really lovely capture. Again, something that I can totally imagine having printed on an image. If I would do that, maybe I would darken this background even further. Maybe just a little minus exposure and then linear gradient at the back. So that way I really make sure that all the attention goes towards the animal. And that's about it. So this is where I would leave it. Zdeněk, thank you very much for sending the picture over. That was thank you for joining us for the live view. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you very much for joining us for that. Now, just quickly running through some of the comments. Zdeněk saying that it was captured with the Coolpix. So Nikon Coolpix. Yes, I haven't seen this camera from you for a while. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the data don't really come through on that. So thank you for clarifying that. Now, looking at some of the other comments, hello from San Diego. Hello to you as well from West Sussex. We had Tony from Essex. Zdeněk, we already know that he's all the way from South Africa. Now, what we have in front of us. So I am here, as far as I know, for the rest of the month. So next time we see each other is in 7 days. Don't forget that you can watch the photography review show live on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, and also in the Academy. We're going to be live again at 6 p.m. next week on Monday. I will make all the live shows ready. Now, if you're struggling to find the link on where to upload your images, first you can see all the dates in the membership itself when you log in at cleverphotographer.com/forward-login. Then also when I add the videos to our Facebook group, the Clever Photographer Academy, the links are actually there. However, if you're struggling, just like Ken, make sure that you shoot me a message or write in a group. We will be more than happy to help you with that. Now, photography-wise, I hope you have your cameras ready. I hope you're going around wherever you are, enjoying the photography. And I hope that you're going to share with us even more images next week. Folks, thank you very much for spending the last hour with me. It was Pleasure as always. I love to see your images, and I hope to see even more of them next week. Take care, stay safe, and I will speak to you soon.